Good evening, dear friends. Thank you for spending these quiet moments with me. At this stage of life, we've all learned that some stories are not just entertainment. They are mirrors. They reflect our choices, our regrets, and the values we hope we passed on to our children. Tonight's story matters because it speaks about family, loyalty, and the painful silence that can grow between parents and their children. Many of you have lived long enough to know this truth. Sometimes the deepest wounds are not caused by strangers, but by those we love most. And what happened next in this story is something few families ever expect. Silence is often misunderstood as calm, maturity, or acceptance. But those who have lived long enough know a deeper truth. Silence is sometimes the loudest response a human heart can give. When words fail, when explanations feel pointless, silence steps in. Not to punish, but to protect. Few people notice this at first. They assume everything is fine simply because nothing is being said. But what happened next in this story shows why silence should never be ignored. After the funeral passed and my parents chose not to attend, I did not raise my voice. I did not send long messages filled with accusation. I did not demand apologies. Instead, I became quiet. Phone calls rang longer before I answered. Messages stayed unread for days, then weeks. From the outside, it may have looked like distance. From the inside, it was something else entirely. It was the slow realization that a line had been crossed without anyone noticing it had been there. Silence is not created in a moment. It builds quietly, piece by piece, like dust settling in a room no one visits anymore. Each unanswered call carried a memory. Each missed conversation carried a question. Did they understand what that day meant to me? Did they see me sitting alone in the front row, holding grief with both hands? Or did they truly believe that love could wait while celebration took priority? These questions were never spoken aloud, but they lived heavily in the silence between us. What many people fail to understand is that silence often comes after someone has tried everything else. Before the quiet arrived, there had been years of showing up, of forgiving small hurts, of brushing aside thoughtless moments for the sake of peace. But this moment was different. This was not a forgotten phone call or a missed dinner. This was a final goodbye. And when that goodbye was treated as optional, something fundamental shifted. But this was only the beginning. Silence in moments like these is not revenge. It is clarity. It allows space for truth to surface without being drowned out by excuses. In the quiet months that followed, I learned something about myself. I learned that I could survive without constant explanations. I learned that grief has its own language, and sometimes that language has no words. And I learned that people often hear silence only when it becomes inconvenient for them. Few people noticed what came after the silence took hold. My parents continued their routines. Birthdays passed, holidays arrived. They assumed time would smooth things over, as it always had before. But silence does not work like time. It does not fade on its own. It waits. It watches. And when understanding finally knocks on the door, it arrives carrying regret. When they eventually came to see me 6 months later, they said they had been confused by my quiet. They said they thought I needed space. What they didn't realize was that the silence had been speaking all along. It had been asking them to look back, to reflect, to sit with their own choices. Silence had given them what words never could, an uninterrupted mirror. This is what makes silence so powerful and so dangerous at the same time. It gives dignity to pain, but it also demands awareness from those on the other side. When silence follows a deep hurt, it is not an invitation to wait. It is an invitation to listen more closely, to ask harder questions, and to take responsibility without being prompted. Many families mistake silence for strength or independence, but often it is simply grief trying to breathe. And if that silence is ignored for too long, It can turn into distance that no apology can easily cross. That is why silence should never be dismissed, because behind it there is always a story waiting to be understood, and once that silence has spoken, it cannot be unheard. Family bonds are often spoken about as if they are guaranteed by time alone. We hear people say, "We've known each other forever," or "Blood is thicker than water," and we assume that years automatically create security. But life teaches us something quieter and far more precise. Relationships are not preserved by duration. They are defined by moments. Few people recognize this truth until a single moment arrives that changes how every past year is remembered. In our family, there were decades of shared history. Birthdays celebrated around crowded tables, holidays that followed familiar routines, and countless ordinary days that blended together. These years created a sense of permanence, the comforting belief that nothing could truly disturb what had been built over time. Yet when my husband's funeral came and my parents chose not to attend, one moment outweighed all the others. Not because it erased the past, but because it redefined it. What happened next was not sudden anger or dramatic confrontation. It was something more subtle and far more lasting. I began to see our relationship differently. I realized that while many years had passed, certain moments had never been tested. This moment, the one that demanded presence without convenience, revealed more than decades of polite harmony ever had. And once seen, that truth could not be unseen. Moments carry weight because they arrive without warning and ask us to choose. They ask us what we value when comfort and responsibility stand on opposite sides of the room. My parents did not intend to cause pain. They did not wake up that morning planning to wound their daughter. But intention does not lessen impact. In that moment, a celebration was chosen over a farewell, and that choice quietly spoke volumes. Few people noticed how this single decision reshaped the emotional landscape of our family. Conversations continued on the surface, but something underneath had shifted. Trust, once assumed, now required evidence. Love, once taken for granted, needed demonstration. It became clear that relationships do not survive on memories alone. They survive on actions that show up when memories are still being made. There is a reason certain moments stay with us long after others fade. We rarely remember every ordinary dinner or casual phone call, but we remember who stood beside us in our darkest hours. These moments become reference points. They quietly answer questions we may never ask aloud. Who will be there when life stops being convenient? Who will choose us when there is nothing to gain? But this was only the beginning of the realization. As time passed, I saw how often families rely on history as a substitute for effort. We assume that love will understand our absence, that forgiveness will arrive automatically because it always has before. Yet moments do not negotiate. They arrive, they pass, and they leave behind a truth that no explanation can fully soften. When my parents later tried to reconnect, they spoke of all the years they had been there for me. And they were not wrong. Those years mattered. But they could not cancel out the significance of the moment they missed. Family bonds, I learned, are like bridges. They may be built over many years, but they are tested by the heaviest crossings. One moment of absence can reveal cracks that were invisible for decades. This understanding is uncomfortable, especially for those who believe love should be unconditional. But unconditional love does not mean unconditional access without accountability. It means caring deeply enough to recognize when a moment required more than convenience. Moments are where values leave theory and become action. That is why families are remembered not for how long they existed, but for how they responded when it mattered most. Time may introduce us to one another, but moments tell us who we truly are to each other. And once a defining moment has passed, it quietly reshapes every bond it touches. Whether we are ready for that truth or not. Forgiveness is often spoken of as if it is a simple decision, a door that can be opened the moment someone says the right words. Many people believe that once an apology is offered, the past should immediately lose its weight. But life experience teaches something far more measured and far more honest. Forgiveness does not arrive on command. It moves slowly, carefully, and only after truth has been fully acknowledged. Few people truly understand this until they find themselves standing on the other side of a deep hurt. When my parents finally sat across from me and asked to be forgiven, they expected relief to follow. They expected the tension to soften, the distance to disappear, and the relationship to return to its familiar rhythm. What they did not expect was pause. Not rejection, not anger, but time. That pause surprised them more than any raised voice ever could. And what happened next forced all of us to confront a reality that words alone cannot repair. Forgiveness begins not with the person who was hurt, but with the person who caused the hurt. It begins when excuses are set aside and responsibility is accepted without conditions. In our conversation, I noticed how often explanations appeared before understanding. There were reasons given, schedules mentioned, intentions clarified. But forgiveness listens for something quieter. It listens for recognition of impact, not justification of behavior. And until that recognition is complete, forgiveness cannot move forward. This is where many relationships falter. People rush forgiveness because they are uncomfortable with discomfort. They want resolution, not reflection. But forgiveness that is rushed is fragile. It may look whole on the surface, but it carries fractures that reveal themselves later. True forgiveness, the kind that restores rather than silences pain, requires patience from both sides. And patience is rarely comfortable. Few people noticed how much courage it took to say, calmly and without accusation, that forgiveness was possible but not immediate. In that moment, I was not withholding love. I was protecting honesty. Forgiveness without honesty is not healing. It is avoidance. And avoidance has a way of returning at the worst possible times. But this was only the beginning of a longer journey. Time plays a unique role in forgiveness. It does not erase memory, nor does it soften truth. Instead, it creates space. Space to observe changed behavior. Space to see whether regret is temporary or sincere. Space to rebuild trust in small, consistent ways. Forgiveness grows in that space, slowly taking shape as actions begin to align with words. What surprised my parents most was learning that forgiveness does not guarantee restoration of closeness. One can forgive and still need boundaries. One can release resentment and still remember. This does not mean love has ended. It means love has matured. It has learned to protect itself while remaining open to growth. That distinction is often overlooked, yet it defines whether forgiveness becomes freedom or another form of burden. There is a quiet power in allowing forgiveness to unfold at its own pace. It shifts control away from urgency and places it in understanding. It teaches everyone involved that healing is not owed on demand. It must be earned through consistency, humility, and time. Few people are prepared for this truth, but those who accept it experience a deeper, more stable form of peace. Forgiveness, when treated as a journey rather than an obligation, becomes transformative. It reshapes relationships, not by erasing the past, but by integrating its lessons. It reminds us that apologies open the door, but only sustained change allows anyone to walk through it. And once that journey begins, it asks something profound from all involved. Not speed, but sincerity.